The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good morning, everybody, and welcome to today's webinar. It's just 10 o'clock now, which we're due to start at, although I can see from the attendees list that we've still got a few more people that have registered who have not yet joined. So I'm just going to give them a moment or two before we start, just to see if anybody else is just logging into the GoToMeeting at the moment before I start the webinar. So if you all just bear with me, we'll start in a moment or two. Well, it looks like we've had a couple more people join, so I think we'll start this morning. Then anyone else who's joining can obviously just can join as and when throughout. So good morning, everybody. Thank you for registering for today's training webinar for Quality Analyser. My name is Jason Green. I'm Head of Workplace Research here at the Finance and Technology Research Centre. So I'm responsible for building the workplace and corporate tools that we're going to demonstrate to you today. We are going to go through a couple of things today, really. Obviously, all focusing on the corporate side of the things, but just to sort of highlight before we start, obviously, Quality Analyser is not just for use in the corporate space. For any of you that operate on the individual market as well, we do have a number of other tools, particularly looking around the individual protection market, software and due diligence. There will be other tools for savings and investments coming shortly. But just to make you aware that anyone who doesn't just deal with corporate side of things, then there are other tools that might be of use to you or work on the same principles as what I'm going to show you today, and the basic understanding of how Quality Analyser works. Focus for today, though, obviously is the workplace. So you'll see, hopefully, from my screen that I'm sharing with you all now, is that we have the main control bar down the left-hand side here, and obviously today we are going to be focusing on workplace. You'll see here that we've got three main tools at the moment which are in the live domain. We have a group SIP comparison, which may or may not be of that relevant to most of you, and the two main tools really that we're promoting at the moment are our workplace pensions tool, looking at the full pension proposition, including auto enrolment. That's comparing group pension providers side by side with indeed some of the master trust providers. And then we've got our standalone auto enrolment comparison tool, which is just looking at the AE process and functionality, and that is from a wider constituents, whereby we're looking at pension providers, master trusts, and indeed some employee benefit consultants and sort of software providers as well. I'm going to actually focus today on doing a demonstration around the auto enrolment tool, because you should have all received an email update that I sent out yesterday morning, informing you that we've added some new functionality to the auto enrolment tool, and indeed we've added quite a lot of new questions, focusing quite heavily on the charges and payroll functionality and integration, which is available between the AE and payroll providers. Before I go into the auto enrolment tool, though, I'm just going to click into the workplace pensions tool and just draw your attention to the workplace ratings that we have here. You'll see here we've got a ratings button and a fact sheets button. If I click on the ratings tab here, it's going to bring up for me a medal table. Now, this is some workplace ratings that we produced back in July this year, whereby we looked at our underlying research data which we hold within the Workplace Pension Survey. After consultation with advisors, narrowed it down to 8 key elements, as can be seen here. Looking at product offering and administration, investment to fund options, record keeping and governance, scheme setup, joiners and leavers, education at retirement, and the AE process. And we carried out a detailed benchmarking and marking exercise whereby we ranked and rated providers, as you can see here, giving them either a gold, silver or bronze award overall for their proposition, as you can see along the top, and then an underlying medal as well for each of the underlying areas that we included in the benchmarking. This is really our simplest form of analysis that's on Quality Analyser. So if anybody who wants to have like a quick look at who they think might be the most appropriate pension supplier, this data table here, or medal table rather, can give you a very high level overview of who may well be best in the marketplace or may well suit some of your clients' needs. what we've done to sit alongside this to give you some more underlying information is if you want to look at in detail any of the providers in particular, then if you click on their company logo or their overall medal, it takes us through to a bespoke individual fact sheet, which outlines the criteria of the proposition, drawing out some of their strengths, key features, and nuances that make them slightly different than some of their competitors. So there's a fact sheet actually available for each provider. You can access these, as I just showed you, through the medals table under the ratings tab, or indeed you can go straight to the fact sheets tab here, and just by clicking on the logo of any chosen company, it will bring up again the same fact sheet. They're all in the same format, whereby it gives a brief description at the top of the overall rating, and then for each of the 8 underlying ratings gives you a brief analysis of what their proposition and their products can do and what's available. And then these can then be printed off and used as part of your recommendation process, or indeed kept on file, client files, etc. We've got the full comparison tool for the workplace pensions, but what I'm going to focus on today is the auto enrolment. We don't currently have any auto enrolment ratings showing here at the moment, but we have actually just carried out some AE ratings, and they are going to go live next week. We're going to announce them to the press at the end of next week, and then we will also then be pushing them live in Quality Analyser. So by the end of next week, when you go in and click on the auto enrolment tool, similar to what I just showed you on the workplace pensions, there will be an AE medal table ranking all the providers with gold, silver or bronze awards, and then we'll also have an accompanying fact sheet for each provider as well. So you're able to go on and then, as the same as I just showed you there for workplace pensions, compare providers and print off the fact sheets to give a high level overview of what their proposition entails. One other sort of key point maybe to point out under the auto enrolment tool is we do actually have certified PFS and CII structured CPD training. So there's a training tab here which takes you through to, I think at the moment there's about 5.5 hours on the AE tool, and there is some on the workplace pensions tool as well. We're just starting a new initiative here whereby we're going to be introducing weekly insight updates. So what we're going to be doing is, as a registered user of Quality Analyser, we will send out a weekly bulletin email taking one subject or one topic each week, giving some detailed analysis around it and looking and drilling into our data and telling you, what providers can do in certain areas and what services and products they can offer. That will be an email shot that goes out to you, just a high-level analysis of looking at about 500 or 600 words. And it will give you a link through to Quality Analyser where there'll be a more detailed analysis of about 1,500 words, which will include graphics and case studies. And at the end of that analysis, there'll be a multiple choice set of questions. Upon getting those questions correct, you can earn yourself 30-minute structured CPD as credited by the CII and the PFS, and you can record that on your CPD log. So assuming that you have chosen to not opt out for any of our update emails, those emails will start coming on a weekly basis to you shortly. But what I really want to focus on today was showing you the main comparison tool for auto enrolment, particularly as it's had some updates made to it. So I've clicked here onto the top tab here, comparison, and it brings us onto the comparison sort of welcome page here, whereby you can see we're given a couple of options. All pretty self-explanatory. You can do a report from new, you can create a report from a template, you can recall an existing report. Just important to point out here that all users have their own individual logins, so everything's under your own specific login. So any reports that you've previously generated or run will be saved, so you can go back and recall them. And indeed, there's a printable fact-find version which actually allows you to go through this process offline with a paper version effectively of the tool if you didn't want to be using the tool directly with a client, or if you didn't have access to the internet, for example. For purposes of a demonstration today, I'm going to actually generate this report from a template, and then I will show you how we build these and how we can share these later. So as I said, because it's under individual login, when I click on to download a report from template, it brings up here a list of all the templates I previously generated. And we can see here that I've got a template which I've generated ready for today's webinar, which obviously I've named and given a date to. So I'm going to select that as my starting point. What's new about the AE tool now, and it's exactly the same features as we have already existing in the workplace pensions tool, is we've introduced a set of client filters which mean that at the start of the process, before you actually get into choosing the areas you want to benchmark and compare against different providers, we're asking you to complete a relatively high-level client or employer profile. What this will then do is, depending on how you've set the scheme particulars, it will then use the analysis that we've gathered from the providers to actually then remove or hide providers in certain instances if they're not willing to accept a scheme based upon these terms. So you can see here we've got a number of areas that we go through. So again, I'm using a templated approach here. So I've already said this, I've called it webinar here, but obviously here you'd put the employer or the client name. And then ask a couple of questions to start building up this employer profile. So here it's, number of employees. You've got a drop down here. Now, I obviously appreciate the level we're at staging dates at the moment is well below 60. However, I'm setting this criteria quite broad to start with, so I want to show you how the system works and how the system can filter providers out. So let's, for argument's sake, say at the moment it's a scheme of more than 60 members. We're expecting contributions per month of between $250 and $499 per member per month. Has the employer passed its staging date? I'm actually going to say, I'm going to remove that question because I've got the one below here saying when is the staging date, and we've said 3 to 4 months. What you can do on any of these filters is there is a deselect button on the left-hand side here. So if you wanted to remove a filter for any reason, you can click that and it takes out the process. So we've said if the client isn't going to stage for 3 to 4 months. They have a monthly payroll frequency. You can choose different frequencies from here. We ask, is the employer willing to pay a one-off setup fee? And let's, for argument's sake, in this instance, say yes, the employer is. And likewise, is the employer willing to pay an employer fee? And let's say they are for the time being. And finally, does the employer have more than one payroll in operation? And I've answered no here. So we've got 8 or 9 questions here, which are just setting out a high-level client profile. Now, this system of these new upgrades actually only went live yesterday morning, so we are still doing a few changes to it, and we are taking some constructive feedback and suggestions on how advisors would like things sort of altered. Candidly, we didn't hold back on getting it out any longer because there was such a demand for having the new updates put live. So we've decided to put it live as a working data. All the data in the system is 100% accurate and live, but we may well tweak some of the functionality as we go along depending on feedback. So what we've done here is we've set our high-level client profile, and we then go through and we actually then start our comparison element to the report. So you'll see in the case here for Workplay, for Auto Enrolment, we cover 13 sort of high-level areas within the system. And by using my mouse and hovering over any of these, it brings up a little description tooltip, an explanation of what the areas consist of. So we can see here that when I hover over communications, it's telling me that communications consists of workplace and member comms. Likewise, if we were to hover over default investment and governance, it's telling me here we're actually looking at default investments, governance, AE governance, and the underlying fund and investment options, so on and so forth for each of these areas as we hover over them. Now, you'll see that I've actually got a number of these areas already pre-ticked. So you'll recall at the start of the process, I captured a template from my login, meaning that my selection criteria here has been set. Obviously, if we'd have started this process and said we were doing a report from new, at this stage we would go through and tick any of the elements that we want to include in our benchmarking. Now, the system will allow you to select up to 10 areas each benchmarking report that you generate, with a minimum of 1. So as I said, because this is a template, I've got a number of these predefined for me. The system will then, having selected our criteria, invite us to weight these in order of priority. So we see here for each of the high-level areas I've chosen, we're being asked to then add a percentage weighting based upon how important we believe each of these areas is. So we can see here, for example, I've got charges of 40% and everything else as a 10% weighting. Again, because this is a template, this is pre-populated with my weightings for me. If you were doing this as a report from new, you would go through and add your weightings here, depending on how important you believe each of these elements would be in a system for your client. For each of the priorities that we've selected, there's also a notes functionality. So what you're able to do is go through and add any supporting notes or documentation justifying as to why you might have chosen any of these areas and to how you've weighted them. So obviously I've got in this instance, this example here, we can see we've given charges 40%. You might want to put a note in there saying that the client wanted the cost of the scheme and the AE functionality was the most important element to the client, therefore we've weighted it considerably higher than anything else. Any notes that you put in at this stage will form part of the Word report at the end of the process, so just to bear in mind, the more sort of detail you put in here, the more of a bespoke, detailed employer report you're going to get at the end. So having obviously gone through with some consideration, applying weightings and applying notes should you wish to do so, the system will then go through and ask us which providers we want to include in the benchmarking report. Now, at the moment, this is split into two categories. This needs to be renamed. They're not software providers. Johnson Fleming and True Potential are more looking on the EPC and provider side of things, so just ignore the title there. But as you can see, we've got at the moment, I think there's 12 suppliers in here at the moment. So we've got Aegon, Aviva, Friends Life, Intelligent Money, Legal and General, Nest, Now Pensions, Royal London, Standard Life, the People's Pension, Johnson Fleming and True Potential. And what the system is doing here is asking us which providers or suppliers would we like to include in our benchmarking report. So I'm going to do a select all here. The only requirement on this screen is that you must select a minimum of 3 providers per report that you run. So having chosen who we want to benchmark, we then go through and the system gives us a very high-level playback whereby it's just playing back to us in the donut diagram at the top here, those high-level selection areas that we chose and how we weighted them. And underneath, it's just giving us a quick replayback of the providers that we wish to include in our benchmarking. Both of these have a refine button to go back and change at any point should you wish to do so. And then based upon just this high-level data thus far, i.e. the criteria we've selected and how we've weighted them, the system will go into the results from the providers and bring up the initial analysis for us. So what this graph here is showing us, in the pie chart on the left, it's playing back to me as the advisor or the user, the areas I've chosen and how I've weighted them. The small bar chart on the right-hand side here is showing us for each of the areas that I've chosen to benchmark, how they've scored relative to the underlying scores set by F&TRC. And the main graph at the bottom here is saying, based upon what I've chosen here in this pie chart, the system's gone away, analysed the results from the providers, and come back here with a first analysis of the graph, which shows us which providers best match or best suit my needs, and therefore might be most suitable for my clients. Now, you'll see in this instance, this graph has actually brought through all providers of which we hold data on, because I actually set the client profile quite broad. So what I just want to do now is just jump back a stage and just repeat this very quickly, but this time show you by how it differs depending on how we select or choose a different client profile at the start of the process. So I've gone back in, I've selected my same template as I did before, but this time I'm going to go in, I'm going to change my employer profile slightly more realistic. And this time, let's say we're actually looking at a scheme that's between 10 and 12 people, for argument's sake. The contributions are actually between £50 and £99 per member per month. The client hasn't staged, but they're staging in less than, actually let's keep it at 3 to 4 months. This time, let's say that the client hasn't have a monthly payroll, they actually have a weekly payroll. The employer or client is not willing to pay a joining fee or setup fee, and they are not willing to pay an ongoing or annual employer fee. And again, let's just say they've only got the one payroll. So what I've done here is I've changed this employer profile, probably making it slightly more realistic at the sort of staging dates we're at the moment with new clients. And then this time, if I go through and continue my analysis the same as before, so I'm using the same template, so it's selecting the same criteria, it's selecting the same weightings for me. Again, I'm going to say I want all providers included, but this time when I get to the initial report stage, it's going to dramatically reduce. So instead of having all 12 providers showing, we can actually see now I've only got 4 providers showing, and a table here giving me reasons and rationale as to why people have been removed. So based upon the criteria that we selected for this employer, It has removed Aegon because Aegon will not accept schemes of less than £150 per member per month. We've removed Aviva from the process because Aviva have an annual employer fee of £350 to £399 per annum. Friends Life have been removed because they have an annual employer fee of approximately £950. They will only accept a scheme with more than 45 lives, and they need a minimum of £100 per member per month in terms of contribution. Intelligent Money also apply an employer fee. Now, depending on the size of the scheme, this varies between £250 and £750 per annum. Johnson Fleming have been removed because they apply a setup fee, a one-off setup fee of £1,075 plus a monthly employer fee. Legal & General cannot support a weekly payroll. Likewise, they can't do bi-weekly, quarterly either. Therefore, as we chose that this particular employer had a weekly payroll, L&G have been removed. And then we've also had Royal London removed because they require contributions of £125 per member per month, or equivalent to £1,500 per annum. And Standard Life finally have also been removed because they have an employer fee of approximately £75 per month. So that's actually now left us with actually a comparison only containing 4 providers. So we can see we've got True Potential, People's Pension, Now Pensions and Nest showing. So this is only the first stage of the analysis, the high-level analysis, but then we can see here we continue to go through to finish the analysis and get our report at the end. Now, obviously, I've set the client profile here relatively tight in some areas, so it's narrowed our search down, but hopefully what I've shown you by giving the 2 examples here is dependent on how you set that employer profile at the start and what your employer's scheme particulars are, it's going to vary on which providers are showing in the research. It's important to stress here that all data held in Quality Analyser is input by the providers. We do not put any data in the systems ourselves. Everything is input by the providers and sent back to them to check as well. So we work with them very closely to ensure that the data held in QA is A, up to date, and B, 100% accurate as well. So we're now going to go through and look at the more detailed analysis. So by clicking the continue button at the bottom, what the system is now inviting us to do is start adding in some more information. So we've already got each of our sections or high-level priorities selected and weighted. And now we're going and looking at the underlying areas and applying weightings to those. So again, because this is a template that I'm using, my weightings here have all been selected for me. If you were going through this process from scratch or as a new report, you'd have to obviously input this data as you went. So this is where we start really getting into the detail of the propositions, and you can start really weighting things in certain areas depending on how your client needs are or what you're trying to get out of the system. You'll see here in the payroll section, for example, is one of the areas where we've added some real granular detail now, whereby we've identified 17 of the UK's largest payroll providers. So if, for argument's sake, your current provider, sorry, your current client or employer was currently using one particular payroll provider that we have in the system, and you wanted to understand, how well they could integrate with certain payroll providers, it's here you could choose them. So if I alter our weightings here slightly, let's, for argument's sake, say, we're not too bothered about what they do in terms of payroll frequencies and what they can accept, but let's say, for argument's sake here, that your client currently uses Iris as their current payroll provider. Therefore, you really want to understand who has integration powers with Iris. I've weighted this obviously very heavily at 90% to try and draw that data out for us. Again, each of these have a notes button, so if you wanted to go through and add any more supporting commentary, you're able to do so. But if we go through now and continue, what the system's doing now is giving us a final little playback. So it's just playing back to us the overall weightings that we've chosen and selected, as we saw before. This time it's also going to play back for us how we've then allocated our underlying weightings at a subsection level. Again, each of these has a refine button if you wanted to go back and tweak or amend something. And then it gives us one last playback of the providers. Now it's telling us that obviously we did choose in this instance to look at all providers who we hold data on. However, we already know that the bulk of these have actually been removed at the moment because they're not willing to accept the scheme. Therefore, our analysis is only based on a handful of providers. It's here you can give the report a name. So you can give the report a description here. So let's just put something in here quickly. And you can also give the report a description as well. So what we're finding is advisors may well go in and run various reports within the same within the same employer firm, particularly if it's looking at a larger scheme where you might be looking at re-enrollment or indeed secondary AE, for example, whereby you might go in and speak and have get the feedback and the thoughts of what the HR director wants from an auto enrolment system, and then if you went and had the same conversation with the finance director, I'm sure they'd probably come up with different priorities, different weightings. So you're able to do various iterations of the report with different key decision makers within the employer firm, and then if you can record that there by adding it in the description. We've got the button here saying, do you wish to save your selections as templates? So I kept on saying as we were going through this process, my selection criteria and my weightings were pre-selected for me because it was running from a template. If we had gone through this process from the start this morning and I had ticked the areas I want to include in my benchmarking and allocated my percentage weightings as I'd gone along, it's here I can tick this button and save that as a template and then give it a name and a description. That means then that template is saved in your drop-down box, ready to use again, and indeed share with any of your colleagues. So let's just call this, I can't call it webinar again because I've already got it called today's date. So if I call it webinar version 2, and that's going to save the template for me. And then we go through and we generate a detailed report. So this is now coming to the final stage of Quality Analyser, whereby we're producing the final set of analysis. Very similar to the initial report, it plays back to you the high-level areas that you've chosen and weighted as the user, how each of those areas have scored relative to the underlying benchmark, and it gives us that overall graph of best match or most suitable provider. Now, in this instance, it doesn't have the table of exclusions because we've already seen that. It just replays back to you here that we've removed certain providers underneath. But as well as giving that overall graphical analysis of which provider is most suitable, it also then goes through and looks at each of the underlying areas we chose and gives the same set of detailed analysis. So it's important, I think, to remember that just because one provider might come out top overall, it doesn't necessarily mean they're going to be the best at everything when you go through. So what this allows you to do is really sort of get slightly more under the bonnet and drill down, understanding who's doing particularly well in certain areas that you've chosen to benchmark. So for each of the up to 10 areas that you've decided to include, you will get a set of analysis just like this, which draws out which providers are coming out top in each area. So that's the on-screen version of the report, but what we really recommend is that you go through to the Word report, where it's got the most value. Now, there are two options for this. You've got a print summary report in Word and a print detailed report in Word. If I just click on this print summary report button, you will see there that I've had a little download happen instantly for me. And this report is a very simple two-pager giving high-level analysis. So what we can see just opening on the screen here is page 1 just gives us a brief description of what Quality Analyser is. It plays back to us the areas that we've chose to benchmark, a description of what they are, and the weightings you've allocated to them. And on the back page of this document, it just gives us that overall comparison graph telling us which provider may be best suited for your client, and just playing back to us there that we've had to remove some due to the criteria. Now that's obviously a very simple two-pager. Now we've got people that are using that document, which they, if you're going to see a client, you may well actually run a QA report before actually going to the client based upon some of the initial information you know. Some advice to say they found it a very useful little sales aid and tool to take along because it's sort of demonstrating to their clients that you've really given quite some consideration about what their needs might be based on the information you already know about them. And then after that more detailed meeting, you can come back into QA, change your search criteria, and then produce a more detailed report based on the final analysis. And that's what the Word detailed report is. And this is the one that I would actually recommend that most people go through and use because it gives the most detail. And what the detailed Word report will do is it will give us all the graphical information that we've seen on screen, plus it will give us the underlying questions for each of the areas that we've asked in the research and say how each provider has responded. So the Word detailed report, if you click on there, what it's going to do is gives you a pop-up box saying, would you like to include a data table showing responses from the top 5 suppliers to the benchmarking? So what this is asking us is saying, as well as the graphs that we're going to put in the report, do you want me to also bring through all the underlying questions that the providers have responded to? So if we click yes to that, it's now going to start downloading our report for us. Now, the Word reports, depending on how big the survey is, take approximately 2 minutes to download. So a typical auto enrollment report and workplace pensions report comes in at about 50 to 60 pages. So that takes a moment or two to download. So if I just cancel that and I'll open the Word one that I already had prepared, ready for us. So what we can see here is it will tell us the report that we've run. It will tell us who it's been prepared for. In here would be the client name or the organization name that you input to the system at the start of the process. And it will tell us who prepared the report and the date it was generated. And then gives us a brief index page of how the system, how the report is laid out. And then very similar to what we saw on screen, it gives us a playback of our initial overall comparison, i.e. which provider is best suited overall. As like we saw on screen, it then gives us a playback of a table here of any providers which have been removed based upon the criteria we selected for our employer. And then as we saw on the screen, it goes through and gives us the individual set of analysis looking at each individual area that we've chosen to benchmark within our own report. And then the real value, I think, within this Word report is at the end of all the graphical analysis, for each of the areas that we hold a graph for, we chose to include in our report, we then also bring through the underlying data tables, detailing, as I said before, the questions that have been asked in the underlying survey and how each of the providers have responded to those. So this report by default will give you the responses to the top 5 scoring organizations, and it will allow you to add in a 6th provider from the remaining list of your choice. So we can see here we can use these tables to really go down and drill into the, under the bonnet of the proposition and really understand what providers are doing and who's doing what, etc. So you'll get this set of analysis for each of the areas that you chose to include in your benchmarking. So what we're hoping to achieve here is give you a full Word report, which is client specific based upon the needs and priorities of the employer firm that you're dealing with. It will obviously have their name on the front of it. It will have a set of analysis which has been tailored to hopefully draw out which pension provider or AE software supplier is most suitable for their needs. And it will also then have any notes and obviously commentary that you've added as you've gone through the process will form part of this report as well. So hopefully at the end of it, you'll have something here that you can either share with the client or indeed just keep on the client records so that you've got a log. So if anyone came back in 3 years' time and said, why on earth did you put the pension with provider X? You're able to at least say, at the time you did some independent market analysis, and at that point it said that pension provider Y was potentially most suitable for my client, therefore we've decided to go down that route. Now these are Word reports, so anybody else who wants to actually adapt these, they're able to. So indeed some providers are using the report and they may well cut out certain graphics or certain elements and drop those into your existing suitability reports that you produce. How you use these really is totally up to you. So in a nutshell, that's sort of how the system works and the output that you get from it. Just to share with you briefly, I've been talking about templates this morning and saying how each template we generate is saved under our logging. So you'll recall a minute ago, I was already working from a template and I resaved it as the version 2. These templates are shared. So particularly for advisory firms that have multiple advisors or indeed multiple offices, you're able to, at a head office or a compliance level, set a series of templates for different employer groups so that any advisor within the same firm is all sort of working from the same sort of house view. So, we've worked with a number of advisory firms to help them produce a series of templates that they want to use. And what you're able to do is by having any template built under your login, you have the buttons up here saying upload and download. So what I'm able to do here is download my selected template. excuse me, and you'll see here, this is now downloaded for me. That's downloaded as an XML file. So I'm then able to email that template to anybody else, and then they can save that on their desktop, and you're able to then, as a user, then go through and do a template upload as well. So you can then go through and upload any template that you wish to do, so that you're able to then share these between yourselves, between your own advisory firms, so that, you know, like I was saying, you can almost then sort of have a house view on what you believe the advice level should be. And then obviously everyone can start from that template as a starting block. And then obviously, depending on the client or the organization, we appreciate you may well want to then tweak that template or make changes to it to make it more client specific or bespoke as you go. But at least it means that everybody's sort of starting on the same position there. I know we sort of run through that quite quickly, but that's pretty much, in essence, how QA is working at the moment. The workplace pensions tool works in exactly the same way. However, it's much, much bigger. And we're just looking at pension providers in that one. To give you a little bit more background, our auto enrolment analysis is currently based on approximately 1,100 questions. So we have a back office system where those questions are housed, an online system where we build those. We then give all the providers access to that system, and the providers go in and update their answers and answer it accordingly. That system's open 24/7, so as and when providers make changes to their proposition or changes to their terms or add new functionality, they go in and they update their answers in the back office system, and then that is then reflected within 24 hours into the system that you're seeing now, Quality Analyser. So the data that you're using to generate these reports is real time and as up to date as possible. The workplace pensions tool is slightly bigger. This one looks at obviously the wider pension proposition, including auto enrolment, and is based on approximately 3,400 questions. Again, the tool works in exactly the same way and has filters at the front of the process, which will remove or exclude unsuitable providers based upon any conditions that you've input. You're all on mute, so you can't currently speak, but if anyone had any questions, there is a chat box which is available. If anybody wanted to type any questions in, I'll be happy to answer them now if they come through. If not, what I'm going to do is I'll give you my contact details. If anybody had any specific questions or wanted to go through anything offline, then please do let me know. So my email address is jason.green@ftrc.co.uk. That's jason.green@ftrc.co.uk. And telephone number here at the office is 0203 740 4563. That's 0203 740 4563. If anybody had anything they would speak about offline, then please do feel free to contact me and I'll be happy to talk you through it. So I hope that all made relative sense this morning. I know we went through that quite rushed. I hope you understand the principles and some of the new features that are in the system. Just again to point out, there will be a communication coming out to you all at the end of next week. And you'll no doubt see it in the trade media as well when we release our 2015 auto enrolment ratings. Once they are released, they will also be going into the system as well as an additional feature for you, along with those weekly insight emails and CPD training sessions that we're going to be sending out as well. Well, there's been no questions that have come through so far, so I assume either there aren't any or everything I've done has made sense this morning. So I think we'll leave it at that, but you have my details, so please do feel free to contact me should you want to speak to me offline. Thanks for your time this morning, guys, and have a good day. Bye.